Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. Welcome to another Friday. May is here, and good to see you all. Um, the summer is arriving, and Montreal is on fire as far as I'm concerned. But c'est la vie. You live and you learn. I'm not a big fan of the summer. I come from a hot country. I've had enough heat for one lifetime, but there are people here who just love being out in the sun. Anyway, it's going to be a quick one today. It may not run for 25 minutes. It's going to be a quick one because the chapter is short, but it's important. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to read the translation first, then I'm going to talk about the context. We all know what's happening. We all know where Prophet Muhammad is. We all know the situation. We all know the resistance that is being faced. So now, last week we talked about the great stars. Before that, we talked about the sun. Before that, we talked about the night of power. We're talking about all those things. So now, God talks about the fig and the olive and the mountain, and that's how it starts. And one device that is used in the Quran, but maybe also in other books, other religious texts, is the fig does not simply mean a fig, but the fig refers to a location where the fig is found. Same goes for the olive, and the location represents a context or a situation which is tied to that very entity. So the fig means one thing, and the olive and the mountain, they mean other things. And God uses this device here to refer to messengers of God that have come in the past. That's how it's being used. So it's a device that I don't think we've covered yet in the previous chapters, because we've talked about the moon and the sun and the stars and the night and the day and the sky. But now it's specific parts of the world. So, okay, the fig is supposed to refer to X and the olive is supposed to refer to Y, and so forth. So I'm going to read the translation, and then I'll talk about the details. Surah Tin. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, by the fig and the olive, by Mount Sinai, by this city of security, which means Mecca, verily we created man in the best stature or mold. Then we reduced him to the lowest of the low, except those who believe in Islamic monotheism, because this is the Quran, and do righteous deeds. Then they shall have a reward without end, which is paradise. Then what or who causes you, O disbelievers, to deny the recompense, which means the day of resurrection? Is not God the best of judges? Finished. This is the chapter. Okay. Now, at first glance, you might read it and say, "Oh, it's one of the short ones. It's very quick." But this is the beautiful thing about God, the poet, and God, the writer, and God, the philosopher. That a lot of the things that are written are layered. Okay, there's a layering happening that at first glance, at surface level, we may not accurately see. Or we may see and we might think, oh, maybe there's more here. And incidentally, this happens to be a thoroughly deep chapter, even though it's only 8 verses. So I'll read it again, and then I'll talk about it in detail. By the fig and the olive, by Mount Sinai, by the city of security, which is Mecca, verily, so that's one part. 3 oaths have been taken. By this, by that, that's an oath. Or invocation, like Asad Aftab Iqbal said last week. Verily, we created man in the best mold, then we reduced him to the lowest of the low, except those who believe and do righteous deeds. Then they shall have the reward without end. Then what causes you, disbelievers, to deny the recompense? Is not God the best of judges? So very simple. There's some oaths, then talking about creation of man, then reducing man to lowest of the low, except those who do good deeds. Then why do you doubt? Is God not the best judge? That is the chapter. It's a simple chapter. Now let's dive deeper into the detail. So I use Quran 411, and if you use Quran 411, the section on tafsir says this. The theme of this chapter is rewards and punishments of the hereafter. First, it starts by swearing by oaths, by habitats of some illustrious prophets. It has been stated by God that man has been created in the most excellent of molds, although at other places in the Quran, this truth has been expressed in different ways. For example, somewhere in a lot of chapters, it says, God appointed man his vice regent on the earth and commanded the angels to bow down to him. Yes, it's in chapter 2, it's in Surah An'am, it's in Surah Al-Araf, Hijr, Naml. There's quite a few. Other places it is said, man has become bearer of the divine trust, which the earth and the heavens and the mountains did not have the power to bear. So that's another chapter. Some others said, we honored the children of Adam and exalted them above many of our other creatures. So it has a lot of definitions. So in this one, it says that man has been created in the perfect mold or excellent mold. Then it talks about two kinds of men, those who, in spite of having being created in the finest of molds, become inclined to evil, and their moral degeneration causes them to be reduced to the lowest of the low, and those who, by adopting the way of faith and righteousness, remain secure from the degeneration and consistent with the noble position. So I don't know how to say this in English, but in Urdu, and I suppose it comes from Arabic, there's this term referred to man, human. It's Ashraf al Makhlukat, which means the best of the best of created, of the living things. I think that's what's being talked about. I don't know if in English, what term is it? The perfect man, magnanimous man, or the divine creation, something along those lines. But that's what it's talking about. Yeah, so that's one. But let me talk to you about in more detail about the oaths. So the oaths are important to understanding what the message is. In classical Arabic, it says a location would be called by what it is famous for. So the fig and an olive can refer to two locations. Fig refers to Mount Judi, where Prophet Noah's ark landed, while Teen refers to Prophet Noah and his ark. Zaytun refers, which is olive, refers to Jesus, who was born in Palestine, where olives grow, or Al-Aqsa Mosque in Palestine. So it's referring to Noah and it's referring to Jesus. These oaths refer to the two fruits and also their locations. So the idea that fig and olive refers to both fruit and location was a view of the scholars of the time. Then it talks about Tur, which is Mount Sinai, Tur and Sinin. Tur refers to a lush, full of trees, green mountain. After Sina or Sinin is the second version of the name of Mount Sinai, which existed in the Hebrew language among the scholars. So Mount Sinai is referred to Moses, as you know very well. So Noah, Moses, Jesus are being mentioned, and then obviously the city of Mecca, which is a contemporary scholar suggests that it also refers to Abraham, as he was the person who established the city of Mecca. So the invocations of the oaths using daily things like the fig, the olive, the mountain, and the city are also referring to great messengers or prophets of the past. Each one of them has an interesting story to tell, whether it's Abraham, whether it's Moses, whether it's Jesus, or whether it's Noah. So that's how it's being referred to. But what I find interesting in this chapter, and I think it's enough of the references, because I don't think they're adding anything which I haven't already discussed. Yeah. What I found interesting was this lowest of the low and finding and rising by following this path. So scholars discuss this perspective by talking about a balance. And the balance is about being involved in spiritual activity or worldly activity. What does that mean? I don't see anywhere in the Quran where it says to abandon all worldly activity and go only on the spiritual path. There may be some extreme, and by extreme, I don't mean dangerous, I mean far from the moderate perspective, not only in Islam, but in Buddhism, in Hinduism, in Christianity, which promote or encourage the abdication of all responsibilities of the world, abandonment of all worldly duties to go towards the spiritual path. The Buddha is one that experiences enlightenment. The Bodhisattva is one who experiences enlightenment and comes back to the earth or to the world to spread it. The same can be said about Pandits or monks or Sufis who distance themselves from worldly associations and bonds and ties and tap into the spiritual. Now, that's one dimension. The other dimension is one who is not associated with any sort of spirituality, is only worldly. So, although I'm a rationalist capitalist, I'm mindful of the fact that too much involvement in capitalism, too much involvement in rationalism and worldly things, in indulgence to human desires, or in only what can be seen and observed and not what can be believed beyond, is also another extreme. So there's a spiritual extreme, and then there's a worldly or tangible extreme. And the topic that is being mentioned here is the moderate and slightly towards the line of faith and belief. Because if that line of faith and belief is not followed, then you become the lowest of the low, or the disbelievers. I mention this point not just because of this chapter, but also because Islam is markedly different from a lot of other religions, because it doesn't advocate for a moment that one must leave all worldly things, human belongings, or human capacities to become a monk or dive deep into spirituality. Yes, some Sufis may argue that. But, and of course, the book is open to interpretation. But the majority reading of this book or Islam is a practical reading. It's a practical manual of how to live well. And I can make similar arguments for the Bible, for the Torah, for the Vedas, but so far, as much as I've read this book, I haven't seen a lot of impractical tendencies. There may be some, I grant you that, but a lot of it is about how to be a good human, simply. And as we've been discussing over the last 28 weeks, that to be a good human, you have to be charitable, you have to be giving, you have to be forgiving, you have to be supportive, and so forth, and you have to be a believer or have to have faith. That's about it. So Islam is more about that. And then, although it touches upon spirituality, it touches upon divinity and angels, there's a lot of talk, which we will cover later, about laws and ethics and rights and how to divide society and wealth and food, and it's a political system as well as a personal system. So I find that to be very interesting. But even in the political system, this moderation and slight tilt towards belief, faith, and spirituality, and away from pure worldly desires, is found. So if I were to say that Islam has a central message beyond believe in one God and Muhammad as the last messenger, or Muhammad as his messenger, if I were to say that Islam has a central idea, one would be to be charitable, forgiving, compassionate, empathetic, all come under the same banner, towards your fellow man, woman, child, animal, to be that. The other is to believe in God. And the third would be moderation. So these are extremes. There is moderation, and you tilt slightly towards belief, faith, um, spirituality, slightly. If I would say a 55-45 split, I would argue that. It's never an 80-20. No, it doesn't do that. It doesn't talk about that. Islam never says to never accumulate wealth and to live on the streets. There's nothing like that. It's always accumulate and spend in God's name to better yourself, to better your fellow human beings, to better your surroundings. It's never to be miserly, and it's never to just lavish money on anything and never without care. It's about personal responsibility. So far, week 28, if we could cover three central arguments of Islam, one is to believe in God and Muhammad as his messenger, which is faith. The other is to be compassionate, empathetic, forgiving, supportive, charitable. And the third is to live life closer to moderation, which is center, and slight tilt towards spirituality, faith, belief, and not an overindulgence towards worldly desires. I think that's it. Because Islam always advocates for being in the world. It's not about, just being a spiritual being and just forgetting that the world exists. No. It's a very practical doctrine. Most of it. There are parts of Islam which I look at with more scrutiny, obviously. But on the whole, it's a practical doctrine. So the central message, if I can derive the crux of the last 28 weeks, is these three things that I mentioned. So on that note, I'm going to stop here because I have to run off as well. Always a pleasure. Have a wonderful Friday. Have a wonderful weekend. Enjoy the summer. Some of you can, I can't, but enjoy the summer, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Have a lovely weekend. Bye.